And let's go to Law and Crime Network host and legal analyst Terry Austin for more on this verdict and what comes next. Terry, good morning. You know, Chauvin is due to be sentenced in 8 weeks now. The prosecution will likely push for a longer sentence since he was an officer in a position of authority and the crime was witnessed by children. So what kind of time could Chauvin be facing here?
Well, you hit it on the head, Diana, and good morning. Yes, they are going to push for all of those aggravating factors, and they are going to try to get more time. In Minnesota, they are going to look at the time for the count who was the highest charge, and obviously that is the murder too, and that's the 40 years. But because he has no record, that's going to be reduced to about 12 and a half years. And what the prosecution wants to do is to make sure that the judge is considering all of these other aggravating factors, and those will include the fact that there was a child and multiple children who were there. They brought 4 children to testify, and part of the purpose of that was to establish the fact that this crime was committed in front of children. And you heard the 9-year-old testify that she was sad when that happened and it made her mad. So the judge is going to be able to consider that. And remember, with the waiver of the Blakely rights, the defendant himself said to the judge, said to his attorney, I am waiving those rights. So the judge is, in fact, going to determine the facts behind those factors, and he's going to apply the law to those factors. And he'll take that in totality and determine how many additional years on top of the 12 and a half, which he is going to probably get under the guidelines. And so we'll see ultimately how many years he gets. In Minnesota, they usually serve 2/3 of the sentence. So it's hard to predict at this point exactly what the sentence will be. I think people were looking at that maximum of 40 years and thinking it will be that, but it'll be something less than that, and then the judge will add on to that. So we'll see what happens in the 8 weeks for the sentencing.
And Terry, what about the other charges? Because he was found guilty on all 3 counts. So what are the judge's options in terms of having him serve sentences on these charges concurrently or separately?
Well, in Minnesota, they do it a little differently. In other states, we do see them looking at those time and adding it either consecutively or concurrently. But here they're going to look at the top count and look at the maximum amount of years, and then they'll go from there. So he'll be considering these aggravating factors as it relates to all of the counts, but he's going to look at the maximum amount of time as far as the top count is concerned.
I see. And so looking back on this trial, how do you think people will judge the performance of the prosecution and the defense? Any big moments or mistakes that you think will stick out?
Well, I think that obviously, the prosecution did an excellent job. They did what they needed to do. One of the things that the prosecution said is they were concerned about the Goldilocks concept, where the defense might claim, well, look, this witness wasn't qualified here, he wasn't qualified there. So they brought in all of these individuals who were qualified both for the use of force and the cause of death, which were the 2 main issues. So I think the prosecution did an excellent job of making sure they had witnesses like Pluger, who was there on the scene, and Steiger, who was the expert, and Arredondo, who clearly was the chief of police, to make sure that they had the belts and the suspenders. And I think what the defense did, one of the, I believe, mistakes that the defense did was to try to poke holes in too many places. I think he needed to focus on 1 or 2 issues that really made sense that the jury could hold on to. Obviously, he had a very difficult case, but I think trying to argue repeatedly that what he did was reasonable, clearly he had to do that, but I think the way he went about it was difficult for the jury to accept, and perhaps he should have spent a little bit more time on the cause of death and brought in an expert who I think was more believable than Dr. Fowler. I think the jury didn't like Dr. Fowler. They, I believe, really liked Dr. Chauvin, who was the one, if you recall, was very demonstrative and talked about if you put your hand on your neck, you can tell yourself whether or not you're constructing your airways. So I wouldn't say that there was any major mistake. Some do think that not putting the defendant on the stand might have been a mistake. I do not. I think it would have been very difficult to put him on the stand because it would be very difficult to argue that what he was doing was reasonable. So I think that was not a mistake on the defense part.
And then Derek Chauvin wasn't the only officer involved in this incident. We know the other 3 officers are set to face trial in August. So quickly, how do you think this verdict could impact their case?
I think the prosecution is thinking carefully about the type of evidence they might have against Tao, Lane, and King. I think that they're considering the fact that their positions on this case basically said that King may have some responsibility because King was on the back, Lane was on the legs. There was really no mention of the legs necessarily. And I think Tao probably is in the best position. And the prosecution is determining right now what type of charges they should bring. Maybe they should bring some plea bargaining into the situation, but they're definitely considering what they can now do against these other officers based on this decision. And frankly, I think that the other officers might be feeling a little better. They have some defenses, of course. They can argue that they were doing what they were told. They can argue that they tried to stop Chauvin in doing what he was doing. So I think everybody is probably positioning their cases right now.
All right. Terry Austin, always great to have you, Terry. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.